Hi everybody, my name's Anna. I'm a psychologist. I trained here in the UK actually, but as you'll probably pick up from my accent, I'm South African. Moved back to South Africa 3 years ago and started our company, Mindful Revolution. We bring mindfulness to organizations, so we're really excited to be here today, introducing mindfulness to all of you. Can I check, who's come across mindfulness before? Show of hands. Yeah, it's kind of blossoming at the moment. Huh? You read about it everywhere. Yeah. And just a few words that you associate with mindfulness. Anyone want to shout out? Well-being. Well-being, absolutely. Focus in the moment. Yeah. Presence. Yeah, all of those things and a lot more. And we'll talk more about that. I'm going to give you a very basic introduction today and a little experience of mindfulness too, so that you walk out of here with some practical tools, so that you never do any more mindfulness practice. You'll have a few things that you can touch back into after this session. So before I do that, I'd invite you to play a little game with me. I'd like you to add these numbers out loud with me. 1,000, 1,040, 2,040,
2,070, 3,070, 3,090, 4,090, 5,000.
5,000. Is it really 5,000? So just a really little easy example of how easily we can be mindless, otherwise known as being on autopilot. And a lot of us are mindless a lot of the time. This is because the brain creates patterns, jumps to conclusions, makes assumptions, mostly to conserve energy actually. So it's not a bad thing, but it can mean that we miss out on a lot of information, that we lose out on being fully aware and present to what's in front of us. So just a little bit of insight into the nature of your own mind, and I'm going to take you through another couple of exercises now to give you a bit more insight. So what I'd like you to do is place your hands left over right or right over left, whichever works for you. And in a minute I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And this is not for any woo-woo reason. It's only because our visual sense is very dominant. So closing the eyes just allows you to focus your attention more effectively. So I'm going to give you half a minute to just focus your attention on the sensation of touch between your two hands. So I'd like you to close your eyes now, and I'm going to give you this time. Just keep your attention on your hands. All right, and when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Was it possible to keep your attention there? Yes? Does anyone know? So where did your mind go? Yeah, someone went like this at the back. All over the place, right? Yeah. So this is very natural. The mind wanders. There's nothing wrong with you. This is the nature of mind. It generates thoughts. It gets distracted by sounds, full of movement. So the next little exercise I'd like to do with you is just sitting exactly the way you are. I'd like you to move your attention to the bottom of your right foot. And now I'd like you to move your attention to your left thumb. Up into your right armpit. Then to the top of your head. Is that possible? Did you manage to move your attention around? Yeah. So we might have a really busy mind that's full of movement and distraction and thoughts and all sorts of things. We also have this capacity to direct our attention. And that's what we're doing when we're developing our capacity for mindfulness. We are developing our capacity to pay attention, to know where our attention is, and to make choices about where we focus our precious attention, our precious energy. So a wonderful way to think about mindfulness is using a concept that many meditation teachers use, which is beginner's mind. This is a mind of curiosity, wonder, and appreciation, so that you walk around your days fully alert to what's going on. A great way of thinking about this is when you go somewhere new. So I was recently in New York for the first time, and I walked out of the subway into the city, and my senses were on alert. I was super aware. I was so alive to the experience around me, the sights, the smells, the feeling of being in this new place. I was just, I felt so alive. And really, this is what we're trying to develop, is this capacity to be fully present, using the senses in our lives. Then I went home to Joburg, but if we're talking about the UK context, you come back here. And suddenly, your mind says, I know this. It's not so exciting anymore. Things shut down a little bit. Maybe you focus on reading your Kindle or being on your phone. You're not really alert to your surroundings anymore. And developing mindfulness is about developing this capacity to bring a beginner's mind, this mind of curiosity and wonder, to your everyday experience. This is what work-life balance is really about, right? It's not about waiting for the weekends or having enough holidays in the year. It's about being able to connect to your existence, your life, to what's going on around you moment to moment, even on your train trip to work. Maybe you make eye contact with somebody, maybe you really enjoy that sip of coffee. You're fully present to your experience. This is what makes life feel full and real. So we're talking about using our senses, and this is a practical tool right here, is that any moment of every day, you can choose to hit the pause button and connect to your 5 senses. And by doing that, you will be practicing mindfulness. You will be developing your capacity to be present. So just sitting where you are, notice 5 things. So you given this visual sense, you'll want to use all visual things. Try to use all 5 senses to notice 5 things. Anyone want to share?
Notice that blue things.
So visual sense of blue, yeah. What other senses?
Smell perfume.
Yeah.
Like the humming of the air conditioning.
Yeah. Did you notice it before? Did you notice the blue before? Did you notice the blue before? Had you made a point of noticing that? Yeah. And the smell. So we become more alert to our surroundings. And that gives us a sense of fulfillment in a way that autopilot certainly doesn't. So this is something you can take away with you. Anytime during your day, hit the pause button and you will be practicing mindfulness. So we talked a bit about how when we were practicing, mind went into thinking. What else can we be aware of? So we've talked about the senses, we've talked about thoughts. What else can we be aware of as human beings? What else shows up in our minds? Thoughts, sensory input, body language, absolutely. Yeah, body. And sensations internally as well. So sensations coming from the body. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we have these 4 simultaneously existing fields of experience happening in our minds at any time. And what mindfulness helps us to do is develop more balance between all 4 of these things. So we can often be very stuck in thinking, right? We think 80 to 90% of the same thoughts every day. we're on loops a lot of the time. This can give us quite a boring experience. So as we practice mindfulness, we develop this capacity to actually pay more attention to some of the other fields of activity going on. We can connect to our senses when we're eating food and have a much fuller experience, or when we're looking at a beautiful view, we can really take it in. We can connect to our emotions, become more emotionally intelligent. We can connect to our body, start to pay attention to some of the messages our bodies might be giving us. So it gives us a fuller experience, a more balanced experience. It's not to say thinking is bad. We have this incredible capacity as human beings to think and strategize and use our minds in beautiful ways, but we can just get stuck there. So this is what we want to be able to do, is notice where we are, notice if we're stuck in some kind of unhelpful thinking, rumination, etc., and be able to make choices about that, connect to a different part of our experience. And as we develop our capacity for mindfulness, we develop this meta-attention, this capacity to know where we are, to know where our attention is directed, and be able to make choices. Maybe we want to direct our attention differently. Maybe we want to focus on another area. So we use this definition for mindfulness. There are many definitions for mindfulness, and it's very much a personal experience as well, so you may have your own. But this is a very helpful definition, which is by somebody called Dr. John Kabat-Zinn. He's done a lot of work in bringing mindfulness into the West. And his definition is mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way. That is on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So you're making a choice. That's the on purpose bit. You're aware that you are mindless, and you make a choice to be mindful. In the present moment. Where can you be if you're not in the present moment? Where else can we be? The past, no? Or? Yeah, the future or the present, exactly. So we often get stuck in worrying about the past or regretting the past and worrying about the future. As we develop our capacity for mindfulness, we get to be present more in our lives. And non-judgmental is a really important part of it as well. We're very harsh with ourselves internally, often, our own worst critics. And so practicing mindfulness allows us to try something different, to bring a different approach to our own experience. So who do you relate to? Mostly. This is mostly our experience, right? So actually we have two networks in the brain. We have the narrative network. That's the guy on the left. So this is the part of the brain that's telling stories. This is often rumination. We get stuck in what happened yesterday, what we're doing tomorrow, financial issues, whatever's going on. Noise. And such that we are not able to be in our direct experience network, which is the other network going on. These two networks can't be going on at the same time. We don't have parallel processing systems in our brain, so it's either one or the other. And what we want to do is we want to be able to step into our direct experience with more conscious choice. And this is what practicing mindfulness allows us to do. We want to be like the dog. So I'm going to give you a little taste of mindfulness now. So you all have a raisin in front of you. So I'd like you to take your raisin and put it in the palm of your hand. It's a very famous mindfulness practice. So as John Kabat-Zinn started doing this in the 70s with people. So it would be a fun thing to do with all of you. So just hold this raisin in the palm of your hand and look at it like you've never looked at a raisin before. So really pay attention to this raisin. What is it? What is the shape of it? Notice how the light shines off the little ridges. Notice the troughs, the shades of color. Notice how it shines in some areas. I'd like to get a sense of the weight of it, so you can just weigh it. This is the weight of one raisin. And I'd like you to take it between two fingers and hold it up to your ear. Is there a sound? You can squish it around if you like. The sound of a raisin. And now I'd like you to take it and put it on your tongue. Don't bite it yet. Don't eat it yet. So just put it on your tongue. And just get a feeling of what the raisin feels like, the texture of the skin. Notice what might be happening in your body. Maybe you have an urge to chew. Maybe there's some saliva going on. Maybe there's a message from your tummy. So come on, it's time now. And now I'd like you to take one bite. Just notice the burst of flavor. Notice what associations start happening in your mind. Some people say wine. And now I'd like you to chew. Carry on chewing it. And notice the process of swallowing. You and the raisin are now one. How is that different to how we normally eat, raisins and otherwise? Yeah, handfuls of the things, yeah. And in general, we eat really quickly, yeah. How many people do other things at the same time as eating? How do you think this could impact your experience of eating? We're not saying eat every meal at this place. Long lunch breaks. But yeah, people say they feel more fulfilled, they eat less, they feel more satisfied, deeply satisfied. They have a much more exciting experience of food. Just using the senses to connect with what's in front of you. And yeah, as I say, not every meal this way, but try the first minute of a meal this way. See what difference it makes. That's another thing you can take away with you. Give it a go. So I'm going to give you a little experience of a practice just now. I don't know how many people have actually practiced mindfulness before. Anyone? A couple of people, yeah. So, but a lot of people not. So I'm going to give you just a little 3-minute practice in a minute. But before I do this, I'd introduce you to the cycle of mindfulness. So this is what happens when we sit down to practice. We focus our attention on the breath or another anchor. So we're going to use the breath today. The attention will wander. So there's nothing wrong with you. You're not a terrible mindfulness practitioner, or there's no hope for you. That's what a lot of people think when they start practicing. It is simply, the mind is a thought generator. It gets distracted. It's actually an evolutionary, it's part of how we've evolved to be aware of potential danger. So it's a good thing, but we need to learn to work with it, otherwise it runs away with us. We invite the attention back to the anchor, which is the breath, and so the cycle goes. And when your attention wanders, it's not that you're wrong or bad at this or anything. This is actually part of the practice. So every time your attention wanders and you notice and you bring it back, you're practicing mindfulness. So it's actually the whole cycle is part of the practice. Yeah. So shall we sit for a few minutes together? So I'd like to invite you to sit upright in your chair. You don't have to sit forward, you can just sit upright so that your back is quite straight. Have your feet planted firmly on the floor. And your hands either in the lap or on your legs, whatever feels more comfortable. And I'm going to invite you to close your eyes, but if you feel more comfortable, you can keep them slightly open in front of you, whatever you prefer. So just finding a position that feels comfortable and in which you feel alert. Beginning this practice together by becoming aware of our body. So just taking your attention into your body, becoming aware of your posture. Noticing the feet on the floor. Legs. Buttocks resting against the chair. Belly relaxed. Back straight. Arms resting by the sides. Hands relaxed in the lap or on the thighs. And head supporting the neck supporting the head. Now I invite you to take your attention to your breath. Becoming aware of the movement of air in and out of the body. You might like to focus on the tips of the nostrils, noticing the very subtle movement of air as it moves in and out. You may prefer to focus on the expansion and contraction of the belly, the abdomen area. Paying full attention to the breath. Being present for each breath. notice your attention has wandered, simply notice and invite yourself back to the breath. No judgment. Allowing the breath to be the anchor to the present moment. Allowing the mind to rest there. Coming back as many times as you need to, remembering that every time you do, you are strengthening your mindfulness. And as we come to the end of this practice together, I invite you to release any thoughts. And when you feel ready, open your eyes. Was it possible to come back? Did it feel challenging or easy to focus your attention on the breath? Thank you, everybody. I'm going to hand over to Patrick now. He's going to tell you some more.
Thank you, Anna. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm stepping in for a dear friend of mine who unfortunately has some problems with his visa and wasn't able to enter the UK to do this presentation. But I'm very honored to be able to tell you his story. And the title of the story is Happy People Are Harder to Kill. So what Anna told you about is a little bit of the theory of mindfulness, and you got to experience a mindfulness practice. Are you feeling refreshed? But what does mindfulness really look like when it's in practice every day? So Conn, this is what Conn's life looked like about 10 years ago. He had two, and still does, just in case you're wondering, gorgeous children, a wonderful wife. He was a big wave surfer. He still is a big wave surfer. And what the wave you're looking at over there is Dungeons in Hout Bay, one of the biggest, big and most scary big waves in the world. He was also the creative director of JWT, immensely successful. And then something started to happen, and he wasn't quite sure why. He would walk around and start tripping on flat ground. You know, he trips on flat ground. He noticed, but not many other people noticed, that he was kind of slurring his speech a little bit. And he was worried about this, and he kept on getting some very, very serious tension headaches. So he went to a doctor, and he said, well, I've got these headaches. And they said, don't worry, Conn, advertising is very, very stressful. You have a very, very stressful job, very stressful career. You'll be fine. Just have this vitamin B injection. And so they gave him a vitamin B injection and prescribed some painkillers, and the headaches didn't go away. And he was finding that in the middle of the day, for no reason whatsoever, he would have this piercing pain at the back of his head. It was like somebody was driving a knife into his head, and then suddenly it would disappear. And he kept on listening to the doctors and sort of taking the vitamin B injections until it got a bit crazy. And then one day, something changed for him, and he realized that there was something really, really wrong. And he was taking a phone call for his wife. Somebody wanted to speak to his wife at home, and they gave him a telephone number to write down. And he wrote down the number. It was 083-556-5929. And he put down the phone, and he looked at what he had written, and he thought, it's not 093, it's 083. And he wrote 8 again. And he said that. And he looked at the page again, and he said, that's a 9. And he started trying to draw 8, and he kept on drawing a 9. And what happened was that, what the neurologist explained to him later, was that he was unable to cross the midline of his brain to complete the function of drawing the 8, and instead he was drawing a 9. And the reason he was doing that is because he had a tumor the size of a squash ball at the back of his brain, and it was preventing communication between the hemispheres. It was also causing a buildup of fluid at the back of his skull. And when the neurologist saw this, he said, "You've got about 72 hours before you pass out and possibly don't wake up, and we need to operate immediately." And suddenly that life, that perfect life that he felt that he had, was in jeopardy. It was under significant threat. Unfortunately, I don't think there's anybody in the room who hasn't experienced cancer in some way, either themselves or through the experience of a loved one. And the common experience at this point is one of helplessness and fear. But Conn had something going for him that many people don't, and that's that wave. And what Conn had learned to do, and automatically he realized he was in a similar situation. He had learned that when a wave takes you under, when a wave like that, which is probably more than 10 meters high, pulls you under, there are tons of water underneath your head. You can see it crashing down, and it sucks you down. You saw his two brothers a moment ago. Conn's a pretty amazing big wave surfer. His brother won the Mavericks big wave surfing contest in California. I'm not sure if there's any surfers in the room. Mavericks is entered by a few daring people who are willing to put up with Mavericks. And anybody has a Mac and they had the previous operating system, that enormous, beautiful curved wave, that's Mavericks. And Conn's brother Chris went over, and in one of his heats, he was pulled underwater and he stayed there for 2.5 minutes. Most people would have died. It's very, very simple. So he was jet skied back to shore, and all of the surfers were really surprised and shocked when he got up again and said, "I'm getting back in." And they looked at him and said, you just died. You almost died. How can you get back in? And he said, "Don't worry. I've been doing this for quite a while, and we have a technique." So what Conn and Chris and his other brother Greg do is, and what they'd always had been doing, is when they get pulled under by the wave, they enter a deep meditative state. And they realize that they're not going to be able to fight what's happening to them. And so they pay attention in the present moment to what's happening, and they look for the signs. They pay attention for the signs of the swirl of the water ending, and then they start to swim. And when Conn had his diagnosis, the very first thing he realized is, "I'm about to be pulled under by a wave." And so he centered himself, and he paid attention in the present moment. It's really difficult to stay there, because this is the next thing that he encountered, which he called the most disturbingly scary form ever. And the details of the form was what he had to sign as a kind of an indemnity before he went into his operation. And the doctor said to him, "It's likely that you will wake up with some loss of sense. Maybe you'll lose some sight, possibly hearing, some kind of motor function." And it's hard for Conn to describe what it is that he did next. People say, "Well, how could you possibly have taken the leap from this form, with the skull and crossbones on it, where you were being warned of possibly not waking up at all? How is it that you did what you did next?" And he says that there are probably two things. One is that he was a big wave surfer, and he was accustomed to being in a state of fear and being able to bring a mindfulness practice, essentially a mindfulness practice to that fear, to be able to stay in the present moment. The other is that he was the creative director of J.W. Thompson and Saatchi & Saatchi, and he had a very, very successful advertising career. And what he would do in circumstances of fear and meeting deadlines and pressure and stress was to play. And he had developed over the years a number of techniques for playing with fear. And during this process, the doctors had said to him, "It is possible that you will have some loss of sense, but what you need to understand is neuroplasticity." Anybody heard of neuroplasticity before? Understand the neuroscience behind that? The idea that the brain is constantly changing, and it can change its shape and form and its functions, like plastic, like molding, like silly putty. So instead of being in a state of fear and helplessness, what Conn did is he started cartooning his cancer. And he drew a picture of what he imagined his brain would look like if it was plastic. Anybody ever played with silly putty or sugra? So he thought, well, I'm just going to remodel my brain. And if it's plastic and it can kind of bounce and be flexible and loose, then I'm even going to make a little sound for it. And it was going, going, going. And he said, as the interns were wheeling him in on the gurney into the operating room, he was his eyes were closed and he was going, going. And he said, we opened them. He looked up at the interns and they were looking at each other as if to say, "Oh, I kind of understand why he's going in for this sort of thing." But yet he continued to do it, so he was playing with his fear. He did actually die on the operating table, and when he was revived and resuscitated, he opened his eyes and he could see all the doctors looking at him, and despite the fact that their faces were covered in masks, he could see the panic in their eyes. And while they were saying to him, "Everything's okay," he looked up and he thought, apparently it's not. And they put him under again. And he drew a cartoon of it later, and he drew hundreds of drawings over time where he would embody this idea of play. When he woke up and he was told that he had died on the operating table, and he didn't lose any senses, he'd somehow managed to bounce back immediately. The tumor, most of it was removed and was taken away for analysis. He started to make what he now calls a very embarrassing list of what is important to him. And what was important to him was his hair and his walk, and whether he was sexy or not, or whether he was witty. And over a couple of days, he started crossing things off the list. And he realized that he had spent so much of his life in a state of stress, in a state of fear, even though he had techniques for dealing with it, and in a state of worrying about things that were completely unimportant when faced with the prospect of death. And what he realized is that his wife Heidi and his kids Lily and Finn and his mom and his two brothers were the only things that were really important to him. And if he did lose his looks in some way, or if his walk wasn't so sexy anymore, that was kind of okay. And when he got his diagnosis back, when the tumor was analyzed, they've discovered that he had a very rare form of cancer. So when your tumors are analyzed, they go to an international oncology database, and the oncologists come back and say, "We understand that this kind of tumor is treated successfully in this kind of way, and we can try that kind of treatment out." But there was not one reported case of this kind of tumor being discovered anywhere in the world. It normally only appears in kids under the age of 5. And the oncologists were shaking their heads, and the rest of Conn's family were going, I can understand that. Conn's a child at heart, but in a good way. And so they said, "Well, Conn, we don't actually understand how to treat your cancer, so we're going to just fire everything at you. We're going to give you a very, very heavy dose of radiation. We're going to give you chemotherapy. We're going to change your diet." And Conn thought to himself, "Well, I'm going to augment this diet myself, and I'm going to put myself in a diet of play." And so he continued cartooning, and he created this cartoon as an example. He created a game out of his chemo, which might seem completely obscene, but he called it the chemo wash and go. And he imagined that as the chemo was coming into him and he felt this prickly feeling working through him, it was like washing powder, and it was washing all the cancer cells off the inside of him. And it would fizz as it went through him, and then he would expel them at the end of the process. And he carried on making a variety of different cartoons like this. He imagined that his cancer cells, every time he was thinking of them, were eggs frying in a pan, and eventually they would melt away, and they would go through these stages. He made wordplay out of them, and he called it spasticization and shrivelization and expellation, and he made new words for the whole thing. Never once being in a state of helplessness, always being in a state of deliberate, focused attention. Not judging his malady or what he was feeling as being something that was out of his control or something that was entirely negative. He made the games out of them, each one of them a practice, a deliberate, on-purpose practice. He was told that the heavy dose of radiation at the back of his head was going to damage his thyroid and was going to possibly destroy his thyroid. So he imagined that his thyroid would withstand the power of the sun. And he was also told that the heavy dose of radiation was going to burn the hair follicles off the back of his head. And even though he had crossed off hair in his list, he was still a little bit concerned that at some point he might want his hair back. So he made up this story in this game. He said, he made the story up that NASA had contacted him because they wanted to harvest the hair follicles on the back of his head because they were so powerful that they could withstand the strength of the sun. So they wanted to coat the next space shuttle with Conn's hair and send it into space because it would resist all of the power of the atmosphere and all of the friction, and it would be the most powerful substance ever created. But it would also ship his cancer cells out into the universe and spread them everywhere. Now, to this day, Conn has all the hair on the back of his head, which the oncologists also say, I just don't understand how that's possible. Nobody survives, no hair follicles survive a dose of radiation at that level. Unfortunately, what he didn't think of was that he might naturally lose the hair on the top of his head, which he actually has done. And the hair on the back of his head is still there and very much strong. Now, throughout this, he was introduced to a science, the science of psychoneuroimmunology. And when I was first introduced to PNI, I was introduced to it by a major contributor to the science, a chap named Dr. Ian Weinberg. And it's about a mind-body connection. And this is the way, or roughly the way, that Ian Weinberg describes psychoneuroimmunology. He says that a state of, a positive mental state is exhibited by purposefulness and meaningfulness. And when your neurotransmitters and neurochemicals are in a state of balance, your immune system is strong. Otherwise, when they're in a state of imbalance, your system becomes flooded with pro-inflammatory cytokines and your immune system becomes depressed. And I think I got that mouthful roughly right. The way Conn puts it is, happy people are harder to kill. And what he realized is that in his mind-body connection, every time he was in a state of fear, he could combat it by paying attention in the present moment through one of his practices. And he would lose all the fear. When he was cartooning and when he was making up games, he didn't feel that way. He was very, very focused on something different, very, very focused on something happy, very focused on a positive outcome. And he had managed to achieve a different result. And over time, his immune system became stronger. Other people weren't so lucky. So when he was in hospital, he was surrounded by a number of people, and he drew about 120 of these kinds of drawings, noting how other people looked and felt. And he didn't want to be kind of brought down by it, and he didn't want them to be brought down by it either. So he would draw a picture of it, and in that way, he felt like he had control over it, and he had control over the feeling. And at the time, he was also introduced to the work of Viktor Frankl, the wonderful Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl had noticed in concentration camps that people who were much more resilient than others were people who had a purpose. So he tells the story of a chap who had made it his mission to make sure that everybody had shoes. So he was repairing shoes all the time. And shoes were really important to people staying healthy. The concentration camps were cold, so if they had shoes on their feet, they had a better chance of survival. But he created a team of individuals that would surround him, and he would find all the shoes that were broken and in ill repair and fix them up and give them back to people. And he said he noticed how the guy's spirit was just never dropped because he kept on focusing his attention on something that was purposeful. And when Conn was going through his recovery, he noticed that this is the way that most people viewed their life. They viewed their situation with cancer. It was a situation of fear, of a messy knot of black fear. And he just, despite all of his practices that were making him resilient, he felt that other people were looking at him in a way sort of challenging that the way he was able to keep fear at bay. And so he started to do something very, very strange. He put up hundreds of these signs around Cape Town. And he had an old cell phone that he didn't use anymore, and that's the number that he put up on the signs. And every day, when he put up a sign like this, he would get messages on his phone for people wanting karate lessons, for example, because they thought, wow, who did that? That's the kind of person I want to learn from. Or he left a note for me in this presentation. He said, Patrick, this is how I met you. And probably my favorite, you actually can't see what's going on in this one, but that's the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art, and Conn is a really profound artist, and he's always really wanted to exhibit there. So he put one of his signs on a plinth just under Yves Klein's painting, and it says the word kuns, which is the Afrikaans word for art, and he exhibited that for about 2 hours before somebody realized it and took it off the plinth. One of the signs that he put up really embodies what he was doing. He was building a community. And every day he would really look forward to getting home and hearing these messages from his secret club, who would be responding to, one of them was, he put up in Times Square, it was Xhosa lessons, this African language lessons in the middle of Times Square in New York. And people would phone up and say, how do I learn to speak Xhosa, and in strong American accents and that kind of stuff. And he found it was just lifting his spirits at the end of every day. He wasn't in a helpless, kind of victim-oriented state. Every time he was doing one of these things, he was building a practice that was allowing him to focus his attention in a very, very positive way. At some point, a couple of the doctors that Conn was working with were realizing that he was making a recovery that was remarkable. They'd just never seen anything like it before. And so he was invited by a group of oncologists to open up, 1,400 oncologists to open up a major oncology session in a major conference in Africa on oncology. And to this day, Conn works with children to try and give them a better outcome. And a better outcome, sadly, doesn't always mean survival, but it does mean an experience that is hopefully devoid of fear, that gives them a role to play, an active role to play in what they're experiencing, because most of the time, people don't have an active role in their melody. They're treated as an object. They're told that something is happening to them. And it's a terrible and awful state in which to be. And the sign-off of this part of the presentation is that we don't have to be this way. We are able to play a role in the things that stress us out, the things that cause us fear. These techniques are not limited to people who are suffering from illness. I'll get back to something in a short while. This week is Mental Health Awareness Week in the UK. And many of the conditions that are causing people to stay away from work and to be in a state of unproductive state, in a non-performing state of work, are things that could be avoided with simple mindfulness practices. So that's the end of my presentation from Conn Bertish. I mean, isn't that a remarkable story? Yeah. And I'm really sorry that he can't be here to share it with you. He's far more entertaining and funny, and yes, he is quite sexy in his post-cancer state. So where I come in, I have a company called Cognition, and I've been working with Mindful Revolution for almost a year now to take what they've been doing, mindfulness practices, and share them with the world in a more scalable way than we can do right here in the room right now. And so we built an online course called Fierce, which has been running as a live session. Anna was you and Richard Jameson, I think, who built most of Fierce together. It's a remarkable experience, and I'd like to share some of the results with you in a moment. But what we find as Cognition that our clients struggle with, if you want to try and take something of what Conn learnt and what Anna shared, and how do you take it to people? You probably all would resonate with these kinds of struggles. You might struggle to get people to be motivated enough to do the practice. You might struggle with getting people to pay attention to new ways of doing things long enough for them to be able to take hold. You might struggle with turning mindfulness, as an example, into a habit. But over 16 years, we've developed a set of methodologies that can help with that kind of thing. And I'd like to share a very, very high-level formula with you now that hopefully you can take away and use in many different forms. And I sadly didn't come up with this lovely little formula, but it expresses what we do beautifully. A great blogger by the name of Ben Rubin came up with the idea that inspiration plus guidance plus follow-through equals change. So we inspire people by telling them stories. I hope you were inspired by Conn's story, to recognize that there are ways of avoiding fear, stress, depression by being able to pay attention in the present. And that there are practices that help you to do that. We offer guidance in the form of great ideas and great practices, and we offer follow-through with a system that over time can help you to build up habits, and over time that equals change. So what does change look like with Fierce? So these are the amalgamated results of all Fierce sessions. And the employee well-being survey that is currently being run across the UK is indicating that the kinds of things that are keeping people away from work to an enormous magnitude could be dealt with if people were calmer, happier, if they had greater self-control, and so on. And we've found that over time, mindfulness practices over a 7 to 8 week period run by Fierce can have, on average, a 7.49% increase or improvement on each one of these metrics. And that's the difference between a sick day and not a sick day. So what does Fierce look like itself? This is the online version of it. The introductory session just gets your mind around the whole course itself. There's an the Psychological General Wellbeing Index, the PGWBI, is run as an assessment, and that produces the baseline level results that we're talking about. The assessment is run again at the end of the period, and over time we show that level of change. Then each one of the different modules, different sessions, just take a step back for a moment. People who are familiar with mindfulness often look at Fierce, the modules, and say, those things themselves aren't actually mindfulness. But the way Fierce is built is that it encourages you to practice mindfulness because mindfulness creates the conditions that make focus possible. Mindfulness creates the conditions that make innovation possible. Mindfulness creates the conditions that allow us to slow down and choose an emotional response, a more appropriate emotional response than our otherwise knee-jerk emotional response to different things that impact us. And over time, the purpose is not really to sort of do the modules. The purpose is to give you enough practice to build the habit of being mindful. So if you think back now on the mindfulness practice that Anna ran you through, the raisin exercise, the breathing exercise, that's the kind of practice that we would encourage you through Fierce to be doing every day, and we've got a mechanism to remind you and encourage you to do that, so that over time you are calmer, happier, feel like you're more in control, and so far the results have been profound. So what does that actually look like? We have a little dashboard of mindfulness practices and a journal as well. So you can journal your experiences as you work through and recognize that you might be going through some kind of change. And that's what your journal entries look like. Your toolbox is full of mindfulness practices, so you can hear Anna's lovely voice leading you on a guided meditation, and a variety of different kind of voices. There's audio exercises, there's video exercises. They're available to you every day, all of the time, and you can use them as many times as you want. Just find a quiet place, plug in your headphones, close your eyes, and be guided through a mindfulness practice. And we're finding that people are using this to wonderful effect all the time. And this is the stat that I wanted to refer back to you earlier. The employee wellbeing survey that's currently being run in the UK is showing that 15.2 million sick days, it's not the total number, 15.2 million sick days is caused by simple conditions like anxiety, stress, not really simple, and depression. And we have a method, a very, very simple and practicable method in mindfulness that can deal with this otherwise horrid epidemic. What makes this even more critical is that this number was nearly 4 million less only 6 years ago. 11.8 million sick days due to similar kinds of conditions in 2010, 15.2 million sick days now. That's not tolerable, especially when there are very, very simple practices that you can hopefully bring back to your people that can change that for them and can change the fortunes of your company in the process. So that's my challenge to you today, and I hope that you'll be able to take something away from it and to take mindfulness back to your organizations and get practicing and take that number right down because it doesn't belong there. Thanks very much, everybody.